advance our civilization from a planetary civilization to an interplanetary civilization. That was really the heart of my sincere interest. But along that way, and eventually a man who was friends with the director of the CIA by the time Clinton became president, who said that you're going to be the first person to brief the director of Central Intelligence and the Clinton administration on this, because they have made inquiries and they have been lied to, which I did not believe. I mean, he was that blunt about it. This is really where I then went down the rabbit hole.
So can the government keep a secret this big? One of the biggest weapons in the intelligence community's arsenal is our general belief that the U.S. government couldn't possibly keep a secret this big from the American public. But the existence of the National Reconnaissance Office remained secret for over 30 years. The mere existence of the NSA, jokingly referred to as no such agency, was kept secret until it grew so large that it was quite conspicuous. And those working in the Manhattan Project developing the atom bomb were told that any secrets that they disclose would result in 10 years in prison, or an equivalent of a $100,000 fine. Only when the weapons were used at Hiroshima and Nagasaki did the government disclose what they were.
Of all things to keep secret, the fact that there is this bountiful option that we have of reaching out into the stars and being friendly neighbors with other civilizations and sharing information, sharing resources, and sharing knowledge and sharing spiritual insights and values. To suppress that information and to conceal it is part of the efforts of a national security state that is threatened by that reality. And so that this is one of the ultimate secrets that needs to be exposed.
We have indeed been contacted, perhaps even visited, by extraterrestrial beings. And the U.S. government, in collusion with the other national powers of the Earth, is determined to keep this information from the general public. Victor Marchetti, former special assistant to the executive director of the CIA.
And in this document from the Canadian government, the matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher than the H-bomb. That was the most top secret doomsday weapon at the time in development. And the second item, B, flying saucers exist, period. C, their modus operandi is unknown, but concentrated effort is being made by a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush. And then D, the entire matter is considered by the United States authorities to be of tremendous significance. What is more sensitive than the development of the hydrogen bomb prior to its detonation? The UFO issue. A priori, therefore, the entire subject has been managed in a way from the 40s onward with extraordinary secrecy around it. The event at Roswell, because it resulted in the acquisition of material that could be studied, it created a sea change in the whole national security organization, because within weeks of that event, the CIA was formed. Within weeks, there was the formation of the Air Force, which was split off from the Army Air Force. It also led, however, the development of unacknowledged special access projects, which is why Eisenhower, even though he knew about the subject on a fairly deep level, had completely lost control of it by 1961 when he left office.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Because you think of generals and you think of conservatives and Republicans as being very pro-military in business, but he's talking about the illegal part of it. He's not talking about the conventional military.
But it's now the military-industrial intelligence complex that are moving bureaucratically toward establishing dominion and control over the entire democratic process in the country. And that they're waging war, invading the Middle Eastern oil fields and occupying the oil fields, attempting to establish what they themselves refer to as full spectrum dominance.
But we're going to smoke them out. And so the public has to understand there became to be this bifurcation that this separation between legitimate national security and military operations and the deep black programs that are unacknowledged. We're talking about the black budget, the deep black, super secret, unacknowledged budget that runs in the $100 to $200 billion a year. I'm being conservative.
My 03 budget calls for more than $48 billion in new defense spending.
More money for the Pentagon when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
We're spending well over $100 million per day on classified programs that have no congressional oversight, no public scrutiny. There's no monitor of these programs. A number of these programs go directly through Congress, totally. When you start going through these documents, these programs start dropping off the radar screen. These are all classified programs within the defense budget, but they don't supply any technical information on the program.
And if people think that the Congress and the president actually have a handle on this, they're gravely mistaken. They do not. This is where we get into the structure of secrecy.
The structure of secrecy is complex and multifaceted. We've been led to believe that we live in a mostly transparent democracy, with the president at the top of the intelligence food chain, a true commander-in-chief. The reality, however, is much different.
A shadowy government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own fundraising mechanism, and the ability to pursue its own ideas of the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and free from the law itself.
There's secrecy that is legal, and unfortunately, where Edward Snowden made his mistake was by disclosing secrets, no matter how inappropriate it might have been that they were going on, that were being managed legally that the president, Congress, and the intelligence committees knew about.
A traitor to the United States.
On the other hand, there's secrecy that is illegal. And these are the unacknowledged special access projects, USAPs, USAP for short.
What they've done is they've formed this alliance among themselves of the industry that makes money by building war machines, the military that uses the war machines and justifies them, and then the intelligence community that is not really an intelligence community, it's a covert operations community, armed with military weapons and nuclear weapons, in that they're trying to push the boundaries now of establishing their dominion and full spectrum dominance over the planet.
And in this document, first document that's on the briefing for President Obama's brief we put together that we gave to John Podesta, this document lists the compartmented operations out of the Nellis facility, what the public wrongly calls Area 51. I gave this document to the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Tom Wilson. Now, this is J2. This is the guy who puts the intelligence briefings together for the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States of America. And he got hold of one of these compartments, and he said, "Hello, I'm Admiral Tom Wilson. I want to be read into or briefed on this project." They said, "Yes, sir, we know who you are, and you don't have a need to know. You don't have a need to know." The head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So this is where the military have been victims of the secrecy, because there are many generals and admirals and very good officers I've met with who have enormous responsibility that everyone, if you polled 1,000 people on the street, I think every single person would say something this sensitive they would know about, and if they didn't have knowledge about it, if they asked about it, they will be told. That is not true.
There are very clear efforts to engage in covert programs and to keep the knowledge of those programs away from people, even in positions of constitutional authority.
Dick Cheney, he would have a need to know. They call him Darth Cheney. We're talking about people way up in the defense industry, people who are running the skunk works, people like Ben Rich, like Kelly Johnson.
So these unacknowledged special access projects do not care what your rank and position is. They care about one thing. Will you go along with their agenda? And this is exactly what happened when I met with Lord Hill Norton.
Since my name has become connected with UFO matters in quite a big way in this country. I have frequently been asked why a person of my background, a former chief of the defense staff, a former chairman of the NATO military committee, what the reasons may be for governments wishing to cover up the facts about UFOs. That, I believe, is because governments fear that if they did disclose those facts, people would panic.
The only thing he really wanted to know was, I was head of the Ministry of Defense, head of the Military Committee for NATO, head of MI5, MI6. Why wouldn't they have told me? And I said, well, sir, with all due respect, what would you have done if you'd found out that there was a project that was illegal, engaged in assassinations, that was keeping from not only our leaders and our constitutionally required oversight, technologies and information that would enable us to have a whole new civilization on this planet without pollution or dependency on Mideast oil or what have you. And he says, I wouldn't have stood for it for a bloody minute. And he was just in a rage about it. I said, that's why they didn't tell you.
Several U.S. presidents are on record talking about the UFO mystery.
Yeah, Presidents Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan both had UFO sightings of their own, but the current presidential campaign might be the first in which UFO disclosure has been championed by a major party candidate.
When we had your husband, President Clinton, on this show, he said, I asked him about UFOs in Area 51, and if you looked in, because if I was president, that's the first thing I do. I go right into those files and see what was going on.
Right.
And he said that he did do that.
Yes.
And that he didn't find anything.
Well, I'm gonna do it again.
Yeah, why not?
Right? And you know, there's a new name. It's unexplained aerial phenomenon.
Unexplained aerial phenomenon,
Yep,
really?
Yep, UAP. That's the latest nomenclature.
I like the old one. I like UFO. I don't know why.
Within a couple months of me briefing the CIA director, I get a visit from one of Bill Clinton's good friends to my home who says, they love what you're recommending, that the president do executive orders to declassify and bring all this information out. This man comes to my house and says, they really think that's a great idea. The president won't do it. It's too dangerous. And I said, well, he's the president. He didn't want to be president. He shouldn't have taken on the responsibility and sworn an oath to the Constitution. And he says, yeah, but you don't understand. They don't think that they can protect the president. And I said, what do you mean? And he's sitting at the dinner table with my children. And he says, well, they're concerned that President Clinton will end up like Jack Kennedy. And I start laughing. I really started laughing out loud because I thought this is nonsense. This is like conspiracy kookville. He says, no, this is absolutely their concern, is that if he pushes on this, he is in mortal peril.
Kennedy may have been engaged in a bit of a struggle with the CIA in attempting to get more information on the UFO subject, and that might account for his termination.
And that morning, in two of the English-speaking newspapers, there was a picture of two UFOs. So I had placed those on his table where he was going to be sitting. And I said, good morning, Mr. President. I sat him down and said, we'd like to have coffee and juice. And he said, yes. So while I was getting that, he's looking at the papers. I came back in. President Kennedy says, what do you think? I looked at him, and I looked down at the picture, and I says, well, sir, what do you think? And with that magnificent grin of his, he said, I asked you first. I said, from what I've learned, we can't be the only living beings in God's creation. And he says, you're right, young man. There is considerable knowledge as far as the actual being of UFO and ET phenomena that we're aware of today.
I am convinced that UFOs exist because I've seen one. President Jimmy Carter.
When President Carter was elected, I was the legal counsel for the Jesuit National Headquarters in Washington, D.C. He called the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, George H.W. Bush, to a meeting and asked Bush if, as the director of Central Intelligence, would give to Carter, as the president-elect, all the information he had on the potential existence of extraterrestrial life and the issue of whether or not any of the UFO vehicles might be vehicles from another star system. And George H.W. Bush refused to give him the information. Said he'd have to go to Congress and get Congress to have the Congressional Research Service at the Library of Congress declassify it to get it to him if he was going to get it. That's a true story.
In some of these cases, absolutely, the president has no need to know because he's a temporary employee. He's strictly a temporary employee. He does not have a need to know on some of these deeper black programs within the Skunk Works, within the Boeing Phantom Works, and also within the Black Widow Group of Northrop.
Congressional Research Service of the Library of Congress, their Science and Technology Division, based on all the information classified and declassified that they have reviewed, their projection was that there were at least from 2 to 6 other highly intelligent, highly technologically developed, but non-human civilizations just in our Milky Way galaxy.
There was deep concern that something this important would be kept out of the briefings for the president. My sort of coming of age, which was hard. Anyway, it's hard talking about this. Trying to say, I was a young doctor, asked to do something like this. Sorry. I'm a doctor in an ER, taking care of shootings and stabbings and car wrecks, and I'm being asked to brief the CIA director on stuff because he and the president are being lied to. What? You know, are you? I said, are you fucking crazy? It was terrible. Frankly, it was devastating. Initially, I have to admit, the CIA director, I thought, to be honest with you, that he was sort of picking my brain to find out what I knew, as opposed to really not knowing. By the time the 3-hour meeting was over, it was quite clear that the emperor had no clothes. He later denied the meeting had happened for a briefing. This is a wonderful thing. Now, people say, how could he write this letter basically saying that this meeting and what I said about it was a distortion of the truth? I said because he didn't realize there was a record beforehand. And thank God I saved the document. That is the original invitation. And in that letter, it is explicit. I talked to Woolsey this morning, and he suggested getting together. There is an active attempt being made at lower levels of government to sabotage Project Starlight, which is the initiative I started and Lawrence Rockefeller helped fund to bring all these top secret people together and recommend these changes to the Clinton administration. And then he says, this group almost certainly has tapped your phones and is aware of most of the details of your plans. Remember, the most powerful people in the world will have a deep, compelling interest in our activities and will use everything at their disposal to effect their objective. Yeah, I thought, oh, come on. This is like a bad, conspiracy novel. Except this became my life.
I think I just became the first president to ever publicly mention Area 51. How's that?
Based upon what Jimmy Carter has said and based upon what Bill Clinton has said, that they were refused this information. I believe that is unconstitutional for them to refuse to give the information to the President of the United States.
Many of the Disclosure Project witnesses have had a close encounter with another facet of the structure of secrecy.
People who did not agree with this extraordinary secrecy and made trouble for them ended up having horrific things happen.
He was talking about being erased. And I said, man, what do you mean, erased? He said, yes. He said, you will be erased.
If you tell anyone who is not in this room about this project, this bullet has your name on it and it will find you.
Measures have been taken by agencies to terminate people who appear to be inconvenient or troublesome through knowing too much.
I've had a hell of a time after I've told this story, but I continue to tell the story because I think it's important for people to understand that this sort of shit goes on in the government. That the government covers up information information that we are entitled to know about as citizens of this country.
They'll go after not only you, he said, they'll go after your family.
They were like, look, man, we're gonna take you off in a helicopter and just kick your ass out of the jungle. And we're gonna end you and all this. And they were never there. This never happened. When I asked him at the time, I said, well, I don't know why you're saying this. I mean, it's if there was something there, and if it's not the stealth bomber, then it's a UFO. And if it's a UFO, why wouldn't you want the people to know? Oh, they get all excited over that. You don't even want to say those words.
There have been dozens of totally, absolutely important, incredible people who've had their careers ruined intentionally by the national security and bureaucracy because they tried to come forward and fulfill what they viewed to be their duty to report this to their superiors.
3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, midnight, 10 o'clock, people would call and start screaming at me. You're going down, motherfucker! You're going down, motherfucker!
And he just said, look, mister, you don't go ahead and start any rumors and rustles. Nothing happened down here.
But who do you tell that you were involved in a UFO incident without them looking at you like you ain't wrapped too tight?
One night, somebody blew up my mailbox by putting a big load of skyrockets in it. The mailbox went up in flames. And that night at 1 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang. I picked it up and somebody said, "Skyrockets in your box at night. Oh, what a beautiful sight, motherfucker."
Interestingly, there was a man on my executive committee. He was a very well-known actor and singer named Burl Ives. And Burl Ives, he was a 33rd degree Mason. So all of you people who think that all these secret societies, everyone in it knows everything, they don't know anything. And he said to me, he says, we all know that Marilyn Monroe didn't die of an overdose. Boop-boop-be-doo. He said, do you know why they killed Marilyn?
Mr. President, the late Marilyn Monroe.
And I said, well, I didn't until I got this document. It's a virtual death warrant because she was found a couple days later. 3 August 1962, wiretap of telephone conversations between reporter Dorothy Kilgallen, who was looking into Roswell and other UFO issues, and her close friend Howard Rothberg, from wiretap of telephone conversation of Marilyn Monroe and Attorney General Bobby Kennedy. Rothberg discussed the apparent comeback of the subject with Kilgallen and the breakup with the Kennedys. This is referring to the fact that Marilyn Monroe had been having an affair with not one but both Kennedy brothers, and it was becoming conspicuous, so they broke it off. Rothberg indicated in so many words that she had secrets to tell, no doubt arising from her trysts with the president and the attorney general. One such secret mentions the visit of the president at a secret air base for the purpose of inspecting things from outer space. Now, this is 1962. Kilgallen said that if the story is true, it would be a terrible embarrassment for Jack and his plans to have NASA put men on the moon.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
The subject repeatedly called the Attorney General and complained about the way she was being ignored by the president and his brother. The subject threatened to hold a press conference and would tell all. It's a tragic situation because she was an actress. She didn't understand the national security state and the viciousness of those who want to keep these sort of secrets.
The aliens won't let it happen. You reveal all their secrets. They exercise strict control over us.
Now, there are a lot of people that are going to examine your facial expressions here, every twitch, everything, and say, and of course, so did you look? Did you see? Did you explore?
I can't reveal anything.
Oh, really? Because President Clinton said he did go right in, and he did check, and there was nothing.
Well, that's what we're instructed to say.
One of the most powerful elements of the structure of secrecy has to do with the infiltration and control over mainstream media.
It's a media of belief, a media of belief. All media is controlled by a few corporations thanks to regulation by the FCC.
You mean Disney, Fox, Westinghouse, and good old GE?
They own networks from CBS to CNBC.
They can use them to say whatever they please and put down the opinions of anyone who disagrees.
We've observed firsthand the intelligence community influencing the media when they're trying to cover this story. We have memoranda after memoranda after memoranda citing the psychological warfare and propaganda value of the subject. This is a very important thing for the public to understand. How do you keep something secret? You hide it in plain sight.
And I suspect that unless the Defense Department proves us otherwise, that it was probably some form of an alien spacecraft. I think as a public figure, you have to be very careful about what you say, because people can have pretty emotional reactions. And I said my goal wasn't to try to stir the pot.
And now I'll ask Officer Stein and his colleagues to escort the accused into the room so that we may all look upon the guilty party. Don't get him too close to me, please.
In the alien costume, the governor's chief of staff.
Now, this just goes to show that you guys are entirely too serious.
So it's there. Everyone, I mean, there's 5% of the U.S. population have seen these objects. But you create an environment where the subject is so pilloried and ridiculed that no respectable scientist or doctor would want to be identified with it.
Internal documents from the Defense Department, intelligence agencies, explicitly stating that they want to have this campaign of ridiculing and destroying the credibility of completely credible, completely honest eyewitnesses to UFO sightings and even sightings of extraterrestrial beings on the ground, that they want them discredited. They want their credibility destroyed.
If someone comes out and says, I saw a UFO on TV, the only ones that see a UFO in the TV programs are the rednecks out in the country that are going coon hunting or alligator hunting at night. You don't find anybody with any kind of smarts or some professional individual saying, hey, last night, let me tell you what I saw.
And this officially was released by the CIA, talking about how they have people embedded in all the major media to change, alter, and affect stories to their benefit.
You are fake news.
So every news agency, every television, radio station in the Albuquerque or Santa Fe area had our snitches in there. So we knew, and we paid them. We paid them good money. One of the reasons you get the people is you pay them, and that was controversial. That was somewhat controversial.
Do you know of national media that have had?
Oh, yes, yeah. I'm not going to name them.
We now have a relationship with reporters from every underlined major wire service, newspaper, news weekly, and television network in the nation. In many instances, we have persuaded reporters to postpone, change, hold, or even scrap stories that could have adversely affected national security interests or jeopardized our sources and methods. And it goes on to then say that they have the same within academic circles.
There's a finding that the Pike Committee made that they had verified 42 full-time Central Intelligence Agency paid employees that were inserted inside the major national news media centers. And most of them ended up being the so-called national security reporters.
The man turned to me, and this is a board member of Time Life, and said, Dr. Greer, we basically are scribes taking dictation from the right hand of the king. The fourth estate is dead.
Reporters from Time Magazine who've told me specifically that they've provided the stories and their editors have spiked them.
Yeah, the high level producers and directors. Yeah.
And how were they paid?
Cash. Yeah, you pay. What you do is you make them sign a form and you tell them you got to report this to IRS. But whether they do it or not, you're not going to give your form to IRS. I paid. Better not say. There were some of them are large.
If you, Ms. McClain, know of any proof about aliens, you can give it to me, and I guarantee you I will get it out. But I am skeptical.
Based upon my experience representing NBC and representing the New York Times, I know that they will refuse to publish information which, in my judgment, is clearly important information for the public to know.
The corruption of the media means that you have then undermined democracy and our basic constitutional protections. Because if you control the information flow through the elite media, and the only place you can get this information is through the tabloids, where they want it because it's discredited there, or on the internet, where there's so much false information that's mixed in with the real information that you don't know what to make of it. There creates this complete confusion.
When you go to a supermarket checkout and you look at the tabloids, what you may be reading there are actual stories of actual events, but when it's portrayed through the tabloids, it gets discredited.
And they're ridiculed and their careers are destroyed pursuant to a very specific self-conscious official program.
Now, this has worked for 50 years. Why would they change it now? This is the technique they've used.
It is time for the truth to be brought out. Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about the UFOs. But through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense. I urge immediate congressional action to reduce the dangers from secrecy about unidentified flying objects. CIA Director, Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter.
And so we're sort of living in the Truman Show. Everyone thinks we have a free press. We don't. We have a democratic process where all these sort of sensitive issues will be handled legally. We do not. And then we have an uncorrupted scientific establishment, which we do not, and which we will prove.
The structure of secrecy extends to the scientific and academic arenas, where a deliberate effort to spread disinformation has been going on for decades. From professional debunkers to CIA-funded committees, our trusted academics and scientists have been complicit in the secrecy.
A lot of people see something, and a lot of people see things that are really they can't identify, but that doesn't mean it's quite a leap.
I believe that people report seeing things they cannot identify, but after spending 25 years, I found not a shred of evidence that we have alien visitors in our skies.
Look, this would be the greatest discovery in the history of science. NASA would be elated. Of course, they can go to Congress to get more funding. Why would anybody cover this?
Let's do this other little thought experiment, everybody. Are you going to do this with baking soda and vinegar, Bill?
In 1952, Project Blue Book was launched by the U.S. Air Force to allay fears from the public of ET activity and to assure them that they were doing everything in their power to look into this.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States.
There's been a decision made within the national security state infrastructure to ridicule and dismiss cases that they know positively are cases of genuine sightings of UFOs and extraterrestrial beings. That's perfectly clear.
Project Blue Book was headed up by Dr. J. Allen Hynek, a professor of physics and astronomy at Ohio State University.
Hynek eventually came clean and said we were there to debunk these cases, not to get to the truth and tell the public.
And I know the job they had. They were told not to excite the public. Don't rock the boat. And I saw it in my own eyes happen that whenever a case happened that they could explain, which is quite a few, they made a point of that and let that out to the media. The cases that were very difficult to explain, they would jump handsprings to keep the media away from them. They had a job to do to keep the public from getting excited. However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. It is this group of observations that we now are attempting to resolve.
In response to Project Blue Book, an academic committee was formed in 1953 called the Robertson Panel, comprised of some of the most respected physicists and astronomers of the day. The Robertson Panel was tasked with providing a fair and independent academic analysis of the UFO case files.
And in this document, it says point blank that the people who are on this committee are answering and working with the CIA, but that can't be disclosed. And these are esteemed scientists in academic university settings. It says point blank, when there's a very strong piece of evidence, we need to set up something so we release a certain type of balloons and film it so that it will look like that to sort of debunk it. And we need to engage astronomers and amateur astronomers and set up a sighting situation where we show them some evidence and then show them how it's debunked.
Fast forward to 1968. The Condon Committee was formed, led by Dr. Edward Condon, a professor of physics at the University of Colorado.
Now, ostensibly, this was an objective scientist who was heading up a committee to tell the truth, because I'm a scientist. These guys are scientists second. They're humans first. And it says it cannot be allowed to be known that Dr. Condon et al. Are actually working with the CIA for these psychological warfare and spin factors.
I concluded that this was not an objective study. So I wrote a letter to Condon, and he was so furious at that he called up James S. McDonald, who was at that time the chairman of the newly merged Douglas and McDonnell aircraft companies, and tried to get me fired.
This is in these documents. This is not a theoretical case. This is why I say you form a committee when you want to kill something.
I must admit that any favorable mention of the flying saucers by a scientist amounts to extreme heresy and places the one making the statement in danger of excommunication by the scientific theocracy. Frank B. Salisbury, Ph.D.
And from the very first meeting I had with the director of Central Intelligence, I didn't need to convince him that the UFOs were real. I mean, in fact, I pulled out all this dispositive evidence that Carl Sagan would want to see. And he said, I already know this is real. But I want to know why I, the CIA director, James Woolsey, and the President of the United States aren't being told anything about it. The why is always the hardest question to ask, and nobody asks it. And I began to explain to him what it really is. It's a big technological question.
We have lost 100 years of evolution on planet Earth. A true lost century. Huge progress was made in the 1920s as Nikola Tesla developed energy generation technologies that could power the Earth, drawing endless free energy from the so-called empty space around us.
So-called empty space isn't really empty at all. It's actually full of energy. So instead of being like kind of a quiet, empty lake, it's more like the froth at the base of a waterfall or something.
The amount of energy in a cubic meter of space-time was 10 to the 26th power, and so 10 with 26 zeros behind it, joules per cubic meter. And that's enough energy, even in a coffee cup, to boil all the oceans of the Earth completely away into steam.
The acronym Unidentified Flying Object is a deliberately obfuscating term, and what it really is an alternative energy and propulsion system.
They had a piece of, they thought was plexiglass, a rectangular piece of plexiglass, for years before they figured out it was the energy device for the craft. And it was connected in such a manner that this device could power a very small watch up to a city. Power was determined by what the demand on it was. And so each craft had one of these.
The implications of free energy go far beyond keeping the lights on in your home or running your car without gasoline. Most of the cost of making anything, from growing food to constructing a skyscraper, is the energy used to mine the raw materials out of the ground. Ship, process, ship again, package, and deliver. A free energy society in which the cost of manufacturing and agriculture move towards zero would mean endless abundance for everyone on Earth.
They already exist. It's not like they even have to be invented. You and I, the taxpayers, have already paid trillions of dollars, literally, in super secret black budget funding to develop these systems.
This is the society we could have had a century ago.
We could get rid of smog. We could get rid of pollution. You wouldn't even need solar panels at this point. We could change transportation in a microsecond. The way we build homes would be completely different. The way we govern our lives would be completely different.
And all the literally hundreds of trillions of dollars in assets that are in coal, natural gas, uranium, nuclear power, public utilities, they're all obsolete. Many people would say, well, doesn't that mean the secrecy's been a good thing? I said, well, that would be like saying we should have never come out with the automobile because the horse and buggy manufacturers would have gone out of business, or come out with computers because Royal typewriters didn't get ahead of the curve and they went out of business.
When we go outside, we look at our cars, we look at our airplanes, we're already looking at dinosaur technology. It's laughable where we are right now. We should be at least 100 years ahead of where we are right now.
And there are still files on this issue classified, top secret, from 100 years ago for the same reasons. Because the macroeconomic order of fossil fuels, petrodollar, a handful of industrial elites and corporations be completely transformed. But the folks who actually call the shots in the multi-trillion-dollar global economy, they don't want to see that happen.
They know that if that power was, delineated to the average person, we wouldn't need them anymore.
They don't want it today, and the likes of J.P. Morgan and others back 100 years ago didn't want it.
When they found out that Tesla had passed away in the Hotel New Yorker, they came in, they had the manager of the hotel open the safe, and they took all of Tesla's papers.
And this was to the director of the FBI from the Department of Defense in a turf war trying to get that information and to lock it up. This is not a contested document. This has been officially released.
A century of artificial scarcity has produced a destabilized, dehumanized, war-torn world, where the power and wealth have been transferred from the many to the hands of the few.
If you take that on, you're going to run into the mother of all buzzsaws in terms of the national security state.
Some of the breakthroughs in the past have been deliberately suppressed.
There are 5,135, I believe it is, patents that have been confiscated under national security seizures. Now, these are just the patents, and this is what happened to a lot of the huge breakthrough technologies, like Stan Meyer, who had a car running on water.
A local inventor has discovered a way, hear this, to use water to run your car.
It's a major breakthrough that will no doubt make motorists happy. And as Ralph Robinson explains, the Pentagon is also showing lots of interest in this project.
A lot of people don't realize that Stan Meyer had a toroidal, a donut-shaped object that put out many times more energy than you had to put into it because it was tapping into this zero-point quantum vacuum energy field. That had a national security order on it before he even got it to patent. It was seized and shut down.
What we really had was a threat to the scientific establishment.
I view this as the greatest strategic threat to survival of the United States and, in fact, of civilization itself.
Who's going to stop this from happening? The president doesn't know it's occurring. The The Congress oversight committees have no idea what's going on. And you have these people who are in the deep national security state who basically do what they want. The problem is most of these inventors think that the world's going to beat a path to their door. Unfortunately, Murder Incorporated beats a path to their door first.
But free energy technology was only one half of the equation when it came to advanced extraterrestrial technology. Early research into anti-gravity technology gained momentum in the 1940s, as Adolf Hitler poured tremendous resources into developing his secret weapon, the so-called Flying Bell. Once we acquired these technologies, they were augmented with the study of retrieved extraterrestrial craft, and we created our own fleet of so-called alien reproduction vehicles.
This is where Bell Labs was involved. This is where General Electric was involved. This is where a number of high-tech companies gained their knowledge.
Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, and EG&G, and Raytheon, and E-Systems, and MITRE Corporation, and Booz Allen Hamilton, and on and on and on. I know many people who've worked in these programs.
Quote, we have things flying in the Nevada desert that are 50 years beyond what you could comprehend. If you've seen it on Star Wars or Star Trek, we've been there, done that, or decided it wasn't worth the effort. So that's coming from Ben Rich. Ben Rich headed the Skunk Works between 1975 and 1991. This is the original letter from Ben Rich on Lockheed Advanced Aeronautics Company letterhead. I am a believer, and so is Kelly Johnson. And here it says, Dear Ben, there are two categories. A, man-made UFOs. B, extraterrestrial UFOs. Dear John, yes, I'm a believer in both categories. I feel everything is possible. Many of our man-made UFOs were unfunded opportunities. In both categories, there are lots of kooks and charlatans. Be cautious, Ben Rich.
We now have the technology to take ET home. Ben Rich, CEO, Lockheed Skunk Works.
It is being covered up, but probably not for the reasons you might think.
Within the intelligence communities, they have something called Ace in the Hole Technologies.
So secret they didn't even talk about it.
November 12th of 1988 was their dog and pony show, a classified military exhibit at Norton Air Force Base.
And then off in a separate section of the hangar behind a curtain, which was opened up once everyone had gathered, were three of these so-called alien reproduction vehicles, or ARVs. The craft itself was hovering off the floor with no landing gear underneath it, nothing supporting it from above. To see something, travel across 12 miles of airspace in under a second and a half, make a couple of right-angle turns, and not make a supersonic shockwave of any kind, no sonic boom, which I've personally witnessed on a number of occasions. I mean, it changes your whole perspective.
There were some very good folks, like Secretary Forrestal, and others who wanted to bring the subject out, but in a way where there would be contact that would be peaceful between humans and these civilizations. But there were other people who saw the big gold mine of militarism and war profiteering and the psychological warfare value.
Their mandate is to lie, deny, and deceive.
There are people who've had experiences with the technology that we're not able to handle it psychologically because it defies reality.
And in this document, the CIA director, Walter Smith, says, I am today transmitting to the National Security Council a proposal in which it is concluded that the problems connected with unidentified flying objects appear to have implications for psychological warfare, as well as for intelligence and operations. We have to take a step back from all the jargon and all the paranoia in Star Wars movies for just a minute and realize that it's very easy to set up a false flag operation.
A false flag operation, also known as a false indication and warning, is a military tactic in which you create the illusion of a threat, often by attacking yourself and blaming the desired enemy. It's proven extremely effective at uniting the public around a perceived threat.
And this is actually a well-known concept in military intelligence circles. We did it in the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam. where we exaggerated, if not completely staged, an attack on our naval vessels so we would stampede President Johnson and the Congress into vastly expanding the Vietnam conflict to benefit, guess who, the military-industrial complex and the war profiteers.
U.S. military officials, for example, have planned through a project called Operation Northwoods back in 1962 to dress up Cuban refugees in Cuban military uniforms, have them attack Guantanamo Base and kill U.S. military personnel, sink U.S. military ships, and blow up shopping centers in Miami, targeting, killing refugees from Cuba to infuriate the American population so that they can invade and occupy Cuba. It's astonishing that anybody would dare to make a recommendation like that, but they did.
Then you can look at Iraq. Concocted all kinds of false information about weapons of mass destruction, which Saddam Hussein did not have, and it was known in intelligence circles he didn't have. Fracture that whole part of the world, and now we have ISIS. So we have to realize the machinations and manipulations that go on behind the scenes leave us very vulnerable. And the big one is this one, where they could say, oh yes, the UFOs are real, but guess what? They're a threat. We need to unite the world, like Will Smith said in the original Independence Day.
Something you want to add to this briefing, Captain Hiller?
No, sir. Just a little anxious to get up there and whoop ET's ass, that's all.
Efforts on the part of a certain element within the kind of ruling structures of our planet to try to utilize the discovery of extraterrestrial intelligence as an ultimate threat, the ultimate other bad guys, to justify the national security state dream of locking down and putting under complete control of an authoritarian ruling class the control of the planet and the resources.
The nations of the world will have to unite, for the next war will be an interplanetary war. The nations of the Earth must someday make a common front against attack by people from other planets. General Douglas MacArthur.
Can you realize that you and I, that all of us, have actually begun the exploration of another world? We have taken the first historic step into our solar system. I am Wernher von Braun.
Wernher von Braun was one of the top scientists brought to the U.S. from Germany after World War II. As part of Operation Paperclip, he invented the V-2 rocket for Adolf Hitler and became the chief architect of the Saturn V rocket for NASA's Apollo moon missions. In his deathbed confession, von Braun warned of a plot to pull off the ultimate false flag, using back-engineered alien reproduction vehicles to stage an invasion from outer space.
When von Braun was dying in front of me the very first day that I met him, he had tubes draining out of his side. And he was tapping on the desk telling me, you will come to Fairchild. I was a school teacher. You will come to Fairchild and you will be responsible for keeping weapons out of space. The strategy that Wernher von Braun taught me was that first the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. The last card is the alien card, and all of it, he said, is a lie. A lie.
Have you been exposed, or did you come across in your career and your network the false INW or the deceptive indication and warnings projects related to this?
Yes.
And what did you find out about those?
That's pretty hush. I don't think I should talk about that. Yeah.
I mean, that's what when I briefed the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, that was the main subject.
That is, that's very sensitive. Yeah, it's very sensitive. Yeah.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
Well, the only problem with that is that if you look at the technologies that permit for interplanetary and interstellar travel, it's 1,000 times more developed than a hydrogen bomb, which if we were to have a massive exchange of nuclear weapons, would leave most of all life on Earth extinguished. Therefore, how could we possibly have armed conflict with another planetary system for more than a nanosecond and survive it? They know that we couldn't. But it's a way of manipulating the public through demagoguery of fear, jingoism, false nationalism, and creating a boogeyman out in space.
Were you surprised when your daughter enlisted?
Not at all. She's a born leader. I know I've been taking orders from her since she was 5 years old.
So you don't worry about her?
Of course I worry about her. I fought in the war in 96. I know what those things are capable of. But I know what my daughter is capable of. And I know this planet is safer because she's defending it.
They could pull it off. They could definitely pull it off. Right now, they have the technology to mimic the form, fit, and function of extraterrestrial UFOs. They have the technology, absolutely. It's seamless, and you can never tell the difference. If they do have a false flag invasion, they're going to use one of these. This is the Hudson Valley Boomerang. This is 1982 to 1989. Over 25,000 eyewitnesses reported this craft. They can use these saucers, the cigars, the pyramids, the triangles as a united coalition. And that's how they're going to do it. We're talking about 150 to 172 feet across for the wingspan, which is the identical wingspan of the B-2 stealth bomber. So the question we need to ask is, was some of that $22.4 billion used on the B-2 poured into this program? It's the exact same time frame. When they power up and when they accelerate, it looks like a spark off a grinding wheel, and you could never know the difference. So if they wanted to hoax an alien invasion, they could do it, and they could do it in a way that's 100% believable.
They started doing all kinds of psychological warfare entrainment of the public by staging hoaxed events, such as cattle mutilations. Oh, it's a flying saucer did that. It's a covert paramilitary program, human. So if you wanted to start indoctrinating people into a false threat from outer space that Wernher von Braun warned us about, you would start staging events that look alien, but that are completely man-made, that are scary, and scare the hell out of people.
UFO encounters are categorized into 4 groups. Close encounters of the 4th kind include people who claim to have been abducted by extraterrestrials. If you had a close encounter of the 4th kind and you are back, we're anxious to hear from you.
Inner stage left, you got these sort of anti-gravity devices with creatures that look like ETs that are actually man-made robotic systems. They're called programmed life forms. And you start doing select interfaces with the public.
We did do that, yes. OSI did that. There was a special group out of the 7602nd Air Intel Wing at Fort Belvoir. They came out and did that. They had these people that had maybe some sort of defects, anatomical defects that were brought in to fool people into thinking they're aliens. Yeah. I can't give you any specifics because the program is still classified, and they're probably still doing it. I wouldn't doubt if they were still doing it.
So they've already got this psychological warfare already embedded into the minds of people to expect an extraterrestrial, not a secret aircraft, but an alien craft. So when they do pull this, they'll already have everything ready to roll.
These civilians got onto the base and got into something. They saw something they weren't supposed to see, and this group came out and went into their home and scared the dickens out of them. And
staged an alien event.
Exactly.
The government will use the extraterrestrial phenomenon to cover their own deep black programs, and so that's the fight that we're up against here.
And then it makes it out through the movie industry and the UFO lore and the internet and what have you, and it starts creating this specter of a threat.
Get away from her, you bitch!
Pardon me, are you from
It's a moo-moo. Sneeze, Dutch. It's a moo-moo.
The fact that you and I are still breathing the free air of Earth is abundant testimony to their restraint and non-hostility. Now the question is, how are these civilizations viewing us? Are they perceiving human civilization